Hi, folks. This is Miss Star again, and today we're going to read part of the Odyssey. We are going to read the very opening, and we're going to read Sailing from Troy. But let's do a quick recap, shall we? As we all know, Odysseus was in a 10-year battle to fight the Trojans, and eventually the Greeks were successful. They were able to defeat the Trojans with the help of Odysseus's incredibly masterful trick, the Trojan horse. Well, after this happens, Odysseus gets into his ships with all of his soldiers, as many that had survived, and all of the ships of Ithaca leave Troy and they begin to sail back to Greece. However, what we're going to find out from the opening of this story is the end of the tale, which is that not even one of those soldiers, except Odysseus, makes it back home. And that is because the soldiers have done something very, very foolish and they've made a god mad, so they all die. But before we begin, we can see we're on page 8 of our PDF, and we are going to just look at page, I think it's 10. Let me skip ahead, and you're going to find that there's a whole cast of characters here. Everybody from King Alcinous, which is the first kind of unusual character that we hear about, to minor characters like Eurynomy, and even large gods and goddesses like Athena or Poseidon. So the first character that we have to know before we read our story is that King Alcinous is the king of the Phaeacians, and Odysseus is telling this story. So that's how this story is being told. It's being told by Odysseus. But we've got to give you some context first. And that is that Odysseus has not just been out of the war that he won for 10 years, it's actually been 20 years since he fought the battle, 20 years since he's seen his wife, 20 years since he's seen his baby son. He never got to see his child grow up, which is why many of the reasons why this story is so famous. This version, that this translation of Homer by Robert Fitzgerald, I think you guys are going to love just as much as me, because it is a much shorter, cleaner version. It cuts out all of the fluff and it gives us all of the essentials of the story of the Odyssey. And when I read it in college, trust me, it was a book this thick with onion skin paper, very difficult to read. So this gets right to the heart of the important information. We open up with Homer calling out for assistance to the epic of poetry, at the epic goddess of poetry, asking the muse, "Could you please help inspire me so I can tell the story?" Because if this were being told in the days of ancient Greece, you would see a person get up in front of other people. He would not have a script in front of him, and he would tell the story. And every time he would tell the story, it might be a little bit different because he's telling it from memory, right? Just like each time I record these videos, they're all very different. You never know what I'm going to say. But the story starts out like this. It says, in the opening verses, Homer addresses the muse of epic poetry. He asks her help in telling the tale of Odysseus. And he says, "Sing in me, muse, and tell me the story of that man skilled in all ways of contending, the wanderer, harried for years on end." That means like chased and really bothered for years on end. This is after he plundered the stronghold on the proud height of Troy. He saw the townlands, and he learned the minds of many distant men, and he weathered many bitter nights and days in his deep heart at sea. And while he fought only to save his life and to bring his shipmates home. However, here's where we see what really happens to his soldiers. After the characters, it says, "But not by will nor valor could he save them." Odysseus could not save them. For their own recklessness, their foolishness destroyed them all. Children and fools they killed, and feasted on the cattle of Lord Helios the sun. And he who moves all day through the heaven, he took from their eyes the dawn of their return. That means he killed them. So, of these adventures, Muse, daughter of Zeus, tell us in our time and lift this great song again. And that's how it starts. We're going to read part 1, which is called Sailing from Troy. And it starts out with that king, Alcinous, Odysseus has lost his ships. He has lost all of his shipmates. His body has washed up on the shore of a random island, and it is led by King Alcinous. And as we recall from our stories and our myth learning, we learned that if you are a wanderer, if you're a traveler, there's no motel and there's no hotel. What you do is you just walk up to a random person's door, knock on the door, and you say, can I come in? Can I stay here for the night? And your host would give you food, and they would even often bathe you, but in return, you would need to pay them back. And you would do so by telling them an entertaining story. And who would be better to tell an entertaining story than the king of Ithaca himself, the great, amazing warrior, Odysseus? So this is where the story begins. It has cut a portion of the story out where we hear about Odysseus being at Calypso's island and things like that. So bear with me, you'll catch on. It says, 10 years after the Trojan War, Odysseus departs from the goddess Calypso's island. He arrives in Phaeacia, and this is ruled by Alcinous. Alcinous offers a ship to Odysseus, and he asks him to tell of his adventures. And this is what Odysseus says. This is how the story is told. I am Laertes' son Odysseus. Men hold me formidable in guile, in peace and war. This fame has gone abroad to the sky's rim. So he's telling Alcinous, people know me, people know I'm famous. My home is on the peaked sea mark of Ithaca, under Mount Neon's wind-blown robe of leaves, in sight of other islands, too. There's other islands there. There's Dulichium, Same, there's wooded Xanthus, and Ithaca being the most lofty in that coastal sea, so it has a nice little mountain, right? And northwest, while the rest, they lie east and south. It's a rocky isle, but it's good for a boy's training, and I shall not see a place on earth more dear, even though I've been detained long by Calypso. Calypso is a goddess that was absolutely gorgeous and convinced Odysseus. She kind of twisted his mind and made him believe he was in love with Calypso, and the time got away from him and he was stuck there, right? And he says, even though I've been long detained by Calypso, loveliest among goddesses, who held me in her smooth caves to be her heart's delight. And just as Circe of Aea, guys, this is another goddess, Circe, she got a hold of Odysseus and she fell in love with Odysseus and wanted to hold on to him and never let him go. And she played with his mind, and the years just passed by. So he was stuck on these goddesses' islands, besides his many other adventures we're going to hear about. So he says, as Circe of Aea, the enchantress, desired me and detained me in her hall. But in my heart, I never gave consent. So he says, I never really loved them. Because where shall a man find sweetness to surpass his own home and his parents? In far lands he shall not, even though he find a house of gold. So even if you were to find riches overseas, that would never compare to your wife and your son and your parents back at home. So then he gets on to his story and he says, but what of my sailing then from Troy? He says, well, first I'm going to tell you about this battle I was in right after I left Troy. He says, what of those years of rough adventure weathered under Zeus? The wind that carried west from Ilium brought me to this place called Ismarus on the far shore. It's a strong point on the coast of Cecones. So I stormed that place. So he's going into battle, and we killed the men who fought, and plunder we took. So he's taking their, gold or whatever. And we enslaved the women. Don't really like that part. To make division and equal shares to all. So he's giving this to his soldiers because they've been gone for so long. So he's taking their riches. But on the spot, I told them get back quickly. He wants them to go back to the ship because, and he says, out to sea again. My men, though, were mutinous. They're not listening to him. Fools, they were drunk on stores of wine, and sheep after sheep they butchered by the surf and shambling cattle. So they were drinking and basically having a sheep and beef barbecue, right? And they were feasting while the fugitives of the Cecones, they run inland, and they ran to call to arms the main force of the Cecones. And this was an army that was trained to fight on horseback or where the ground required on foot. And they came, I love this line here, with dawn over that terrain, like the leaves and the blades of spring. So what this means is they are so fresh and ready, like leaves and blades of spring, right? Ready for battle. So doom appeared to us, because these are fresh soldiers ready to kill. Dark word of Zeus for us are evil days. So it's like we're being punished. But my men stood up and they made a fight of it, and backed on the ships with lances kept in play. From bright morning through the blaze of noon, holding our beach, although we were so far outnumbered. But when the sun passed toward unyoking time, that means it's getting to be nighttime, the time when you would take the yoke off of your oxen, right, and put him back in the barn. Then the Achaeans, the Greeks, if you look off to the side, one by one, they gave way. 6 benches were left empty in every ship, so a lot of Greeks died in this battle. And that evening, when we pulled away from death, and this new grief we bore with us to sea, our precious lives we had, but not our friends. And no ship made sail the next day until some shipmate had raised a cry 3 times for each poor ghost that was unfleshed by the Zacones on that field. So, guys, that is part 1. It includes a little bit of background to get you started on his first adventure. We now understand that Odysseus is on a random island, but this King Alcinous has offered him a safe haven, and he's even offered him a ship to get back home. But meanwhile, while Odysseus is getting kind of his strength up, he's going to tell the story of his adventures. And the next one we're going to read is called The Lotus Eaters. So I hope you all enjoyed that. And I hope you rejoin me for another story.